All right, everybody, welcome to Virtual Bourbon. My name is Steve Akley. We've got a fun event tonight. This is part of our Dusty series. We've got our Dusty Hunter in-house, Mr. Wes Hardin, and he went out and he found a good one for us this time. He went out and found some vintage Old Grandad, and there is this big-time allure to this one because you hear all these great stories. It's a butterscotch bomb, and everyone talks about how great it used to be. And Old Grandad, Mike and I were talking here when we got started. Old Grandad's still pretty solid, but those old-time ones are really cherished, so should be fun one. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our host tonight, Mr. Wes Hardin. Hey, Wes, how you doing?
Hey, Steve, how's everyone doing?
Very good. Good. Absolutely.
Good. You ready to hand it to me?
I did, yeah.
All right. We're ready to go then. All right.
I do have, remind me when we do our voting, because we'll vote tonight which one we think is the old one.
Okay.
I have Rick Brenner's here. He texted it to me because he was not going to be able to be here tonight, but he wants to have his vote counted. So I'll be voting for him. And I didn't even look what he voted for what. So I just saw it came in, and I will vote myself here too, because I don't know. Even though I'm part of the team here, I don't know, because Wes just sends out the stuff.
Yeah, he's usually pretty spot on. We'll see if he keeps his record.
Yeah, Rick. I don't think Rick's ever missed one. So
yeah, you don't want to bet against him if you're betting on who guesses.
I've learned that lesson the hard way several times.
All right. Yeah. So tonight we are like all events, we're going to taste some whiskey. I'm going to walk through the history. In this case, it's going to be more brand history than it is distillery history. But Old Grandad, just in general, it's one of those. It's part of what being called the olds. So they lumped in Old Overholt, Old Taylor, Old Grandad, Old Crow when they purchased all those brands in the 80s from national distillers, and they kind of lumped those into the olds. And some of the brands have kind of been up and down, and some have been kind of lay to the wasteland as bottom shelfers. Others, they've tried to do some revival things, and others like this one, they kind of they didn't mess with it a whole lot. They did some proof changing we'll talk about later, but Old Grandad, this is a brand that goes back almost 144 years. So it earns its name, that's for sure. The distillery was created in 1840 by a person named Raymond Hayden. The last name should sound pretty familiar to most everyone attending and anybody watching this later. And they named it after his grandfather, Meredith Basil Hayden, which is really the Hayden that everyone knows and remembers. As most people know, but if you don't, the picture on the front of all Old Grandad bottles, and the pictures changed over time. Certain ones have looked more like wax figures. Some have looked kind of cartoonish. In some, he's been super mad and pissed off, and some looks like he's been drinking a little. He's kind of changed off and on, but it's always been Basil Hayden who was honored on all of the labels for all of the different iterations of Old Grandad. There is not a version of Old Grandad at any time that does not have his picture on the label outside of any gift decanters back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So Old Grandad, they weren't as prolific with Old Grandad with decanters. Most of the decanters that I've seen with Old Grandad are more of what I call your reusable decanters. They're made of glass, or I think there was even one that was crystal. So they're like the clear display kind, as opposed to some of the ones we see with like Cabin Steel. And of course, Wild Turkey has all the different ceramic decanters, which are typically, once you pop those corks, they disintegrate. They're useless after that. You have to decant.
Wes, I was just going to jump in from when I was a kid. Speaking of things old time, and we're talking about era of this Old Grandad here. When I was a little kid, there was a store that only sold decanters. Because my dad used to go there. He wasn't a big drinker, but around Christmas he would go there and go shopping. And I would love to go on that trip with him because I loved the looks of the different decanters, and I'd help him pick out ones. He'd be like, "All right, I got to buy." He'd have a list. I got to buy this for the boss. I got to buy this for that. And I just loved going through and looking at all those old decanters. decanters. And it's, funny to think about now,
if you were only a time traveler,
it was that big. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were only a time traveler, you could go back and just say, Dad, buy them all. Every week, just come in and clean them out, put them in a nice, cool, safe location.
Yeah.
And I'll see you in 30 or 40 years, and we'll deal with it. So
Mhm.
it's always, if everyone could go back in time, they'd do everything differently, and investments and purchases are definitely one of them. But yeah, so Basil Hayden, he is Old Granddad. So if you were ever curious and didn't know who the old man was on the label, it is our good buddy Basil Hayden. We'll talk about him in a little bit as well. In fact, we'll
here's one thing too. I'll throw another nugget to you, if you don't mind. If I'm just
no, you're good. No, you're good.
So Bernie Lubbers, who of course started out at Beam, as Beam historian and all that, he claims it's Basil Hayden because that's he was from England and that's how they would have said it. Now, if you talk to Freddie No, who's the 8th generation distiller for Jim Beam, he says it's Basil Hayden, and that's what it is. So in reality, it probably was Basil Hayden, but the brand is Basil Hayden. So you're right.
Yeah, I've heard both of those, and that's why I like kind of switch them up. So sometimes I'll say Basil, sometimes I'll say Basil, and that way I make everybody happy and don't get into an online argument with anyone over how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
So I think what I want to do real quick, because I've got a really pretty in-depth history of this. We've kind of started our last few events splitting some of the sampling up. Let's go ahead and jump into sample number 1. Let's go ahead and start nosing and sampling that, and then you guys can enjoy that while I'm talking about history here. And again, other than myself, no one knows what number 1 is versus number 2. Here's what I will say, just to make sure everybody's clear. The Dusty in this case is a 1970 86 proof, which is really common for that era. Old Granddad. This is obviously distilled when they were owned by National Distillers. It's pretty popular Dusty in the world of Dusties. So that's one of the samples. The other sample is actually an 86 proofer, but it's discontinued. Old Granddad does not have, and hasn't had for a while, an 86 proof. They have an 80. We'll get into this later. They have an 80, the bottled and bond 100 proof, and then they obviously have the 114. So this is actually your other sample is a 2013, which is the last year they made the 86 proof, is a 2013.
Wow, it's kind of like a mini Dusty as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like
this is a surprise bonus event.
Yeah, I held that back just for the event. I knew it the whole time, but I didn't want to put it in the thing. It was a nice surprise. So it's like a young wannabe Dusty against one of the old timer Dusties here.
So Basil Hayden is the only guy that's on 2 different brands. He's on Old Granddad, he's featured, and he's on Basil Hayden's, of course, is named after him. Beam is big into that's a Beam brand. In reality, they kind of look at the olds and stuff like that as other brands. They don't really put marketing dollars and things like that. But Wes, what's your choice between you're at my house and I say, hey, I can pour you a glass of Basil Hayden's, or I've got a glass of Old Granddad.
Old Granddad for me all day.
Yeah, all day long. Yeah, to me, that's the better one.
I'll say the Basil
Hayden's doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, it doesn't for me. The Basil Hayden rum finished, I think it was pretty decent. The flavoring barrel helped out quite a bit, but no, it's Basil Hayden is a nice entry bourbon.
Yeah.
But no, if you offer me a glass of each, I'm going with the Old Granddad for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so Basil Hayden, we know he's one of the bourbon pioneers. He's got his own brand now at Beam Suntory we just talked about. He led a group of 25 Catholic families from Maryland into Kentucky near what now is today Bardstown. And like most Kentucky settlers, he cleared a field, established his farm. Once he started growing crops and had excess grains, he did what most everyone did. They took the lessons from the early settlers in the East Coast and then their descendants from overseas, and they started distilling their excess corn to get rid of it. And so he began very quickly after his first crop started distilling. As far as the Old Granddad story, upon Basil Basil Hayden's death in 1820, his son Lewis continued distilling there on the farm. Interesting, it has nothing to do with what we're doing tonight, but I always love these intertwined legacy families, and this is one of those families. Basil Hayden's son Lewis married a woman named Polly Dant
Oh, okay.
from the J.W. Dant family tree. So, yeah, from that family. So it's just another example of how these legacy distillers and families and brands just end up intermingled throughout their life there. So it was an interesting piece of information I did not know, but I did find out. So it was cool. In the 1840s, Lewis died. His second son, Raymond Bishop, they called him RB. He assumed control of the farm and distillery. And in 1882, he built the R.B. Hayden and Company distillery at Hobbs Station in Nelson County. Hobbs Station is just a different area of Bardstown, basically. At that time, it was Bardstown area. And he also
you were going to say he got into roast beef, RB.
Exactly. And he took on a partner who went by the name of F.L. Ferriel. He was actually a fur trader, I believe, and a banker. The distillery had a mashing capacity of about 100 bushels, and they could store 7,000 barrels for aging, which, if you think about it, that's a pretty large amount of barrels back in the day for that type of production. So it's pretty impressive. The whiskey from that new distillery, the R.B. Hayden Company distillery, was actually the first distillate that was branded as Old Grandad. So when he was distilling on the old farm distillery, they never branded it as Old Grandad. It was not until they went to the Hobbs, they built the Hobbs Station distillery, that they started branding it as an Old Grandad. Only 3 years after opening, RB died. He actually had no heirs. So his partner took over for a short time, and then he sold it to another guy. And then finally in 1899, another pretty important, famous family in the bourbon world, the Wathen family, purchased the distillery and the brand in 1895. After the purchase, the Wathens actually changed the name of the distillery to the Old Grandad Distillery. So that was the first record of an Old Grandad distillery being around 1899, pre-Prohibition, obviously. And then, like most rural distillery companies back in the 1800s, they eventually built a sales office in either Louisville, in this case, sometimes Lexington, sometimes Cincinnati, Newport, and sometimes Owensboro. But most all of the distilleries in what I call central Kentucky, Bardstown, Lebanon, all those areas in there, they typically always had a sales office. This is back in the day when it's all handshakes and things of that nature. So they had to have sales office and so forth in the heart of where all the business happened, which is always away from the manufacturing. Nace Wallace, N-A-C-E, he became the distiller and the manager of the distillery. But then, like a lot of distilleries back in the day, a year after they purchased it, it burned to the ground in 1900. So it was rebuilt, and up until Prohibition, they actually had a capacity of about 400 bushels a day. So we know, based on the previous information, that 100 bushels of mashing a day, they could eventually lead to about 7,000 stored barrels at any given time. My guess is their capacity was much more with the 400 bushels a day. So once Prohibition started, the Wathens created the original American Medicinal Spirits Company so that they could sell whiskey during Prohibition. They had one of the licenses. What they ended up doing is they actually moved all of the whiskey out of their federally regulated warehouses into one so they could sell them under the medicinal license. And so they moved all the whiskey, they shut down the distillery, moved all the whiskey out of the Old Grandad, put it into the consolidated warehouse, and created American Medicinal Spirits. Later in life, in 1929, American Medicinal Spirits actually became national distillers.
Yeah.
And
So what kind of happened too with Prohibition? And imagine this. Imagine we're all distillery owners here, and we all come together and we're like, I run a small distillery, and they're only giving out 10 of these licenses. What are the chances that Akley Distilling can get one of those? Maybe if we all work together, we can get one of these licenses. So they all go and they combine forces and they work together, and that's exactly what happens. They consolidate the whiskey and all that, but then they start falling off. They're like, hey, this is never going to end. Akley Distillers, I'll sell mine to the group. So that's what, lo and behold, that's what happens. And ultimately, National Distillers takes all these brands that had come together, and there's one owner by the end of Prohibition. So ends up being a big player based out of Louisville. So yeah, that's pretty cool how that worked out. They got all these cool brands that were small regional players all together with this, what was then at that point a pretty big company.
Absolutely. So let's take a short little break while we're up until Prohibition. Let's nose and taste and give some opinions on this sample number 1. What do you guys think about it?
Well, I like what we got going on here.
Yeah.
It's
that peanut
kind of honey.
Yep.
I mean,
Cracker Jack.
Yeah. And these are both 86 proof, right? It's
both 86. That's absolutely correct.
It's got a great finish for 86. Again, that's not something we think about. You pour me an 86 proof whiskey today, and I'll be like, man, there's nothing going on here. With this is really pleasant.
Well, and the one thing that a lot of people either don't remember or don't realize about Old Grandad brand, and it's always been this way, it's always been a high rye bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And so, pre-Prohibition, and even after Prohibition and during Prohibition, because we all know there was still distilling going on, ryes and high ryes were super popular. But then, we get into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the industry is changing as the world's changing. And they went totally opposite. Wheated bourbons became super popular. Low proof became super popular. And a lot of the high rye bourbons started gradually reducing some of that rye content to be more palatable for the younger generation. But Old Grandad brand kept the high rye in the mash bill the entire time for everything that I could see. So that finish to me it's not really it's a nice spicy finish, but it's not like a heavy ethanol finish. It's like it's a good rye spice type of finish. But yeah, it doesn't drink like an 86.
No.
Yeah, the nose, I like. To me, the nose is almost peanut butter jelly. I get a little bit of like cherry, strawberry, but I also get that like peanut that you guys were talking about. It's almost it's a great nose.
Very lifesaver right after you eat a payday bar.
There you go.
Yeah.
Betsy and Nikki, you gals are new. What do you guys think? We're gonna put you on the spot.
No, we agree. Actually, I kind of said the same thing, Wes. I said I was getting like the fruit, the strawberry, kind of maybe some stone fruit. And we were trying to figure out what the other thing was. And I do think it's probably peanut.
Yeah. And just for the record, that's Nikki and I'm Betsy.
Yeah.
Just for clarification purposes.
On the screen, it's backwards. I have to.
I know, it's complicated. But yeah, no, I mean, and same thing that you guys were all saying, like it, at first blush, it tastes, the rye spice makes it, knowing that it's a high rye bourbon explains why it tastes a higher proof than 86. But there's a lot going on there. I'm really digging it.
Yeah.
It's a super viscous. I mean, like,
very.
I've swirled this thing down, and it's like, it looks like a maker's bottle with the drips that are coming.
Right.
Down.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You can see it on the glass, even on the screen. Shows up so well. Wild.
Tim, Bob, Mike, anybody?
It's solid. Absolutely. As Old Granddad should be.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little cinnamon in there somewhere.
Cinnamon.
And that's the spice I get on the back end. I get it's a little cinnamon, and then I get just a hint of like I pull mint out of high rye bourbon or ryes quite often. I get a little bit of that mint as well.
I get a little bit of almost right at the tail end. It's almost like gunpowder,
Oh,
but in a good way, like a firework just went off and you kind of walk through you get that smoke blowing over you. It's not bad. It's kind of an interesting little finish.
Mhm.
you got the special vial then, because there's one I put a firecracker in and set off. I didn't know who was going to get it though.
Smoked it prior to capping.
All right. Unless anybody else has any nosing tasting notes, I'm going to let you guys enjoy. I'm going to continue on and then we'll sample number 2 here in a minute.
Okay.
All right. So we're at Prohibition. Like a lot of distilleries during Prohibition, this distillery was obviously shut down. We talked about all the stock going to the American Medicinal Spirits congregate or collective warehouse. This distillery was kind of left in disrepair. And actually today there have been people that have gone to the site as best as they can find it to see if there's any kind of remains or there's some bourbon archaeology people that like going and digging up in areas that used to have distilleries. But the general consensus is there's not a lot of or any visible remains. So 1929, Medicinal Spirits was purchased by National Distillers. We talked about that. After Prohibition, the Old Grandad brand was started again, but it was produced at various distillers who were producing and survived through Prohibition. My guess is there's probably a lot of brands in probably the early to late 30s, mid 30s, because not a lot of whiskey was over 6 years old at that time, 4 years old. There's probably a lot of brands that were branded like Old Grandad, but were probably Brown Forman distillate, Weller Stitzel distillate, whoever else had running operations. So for the first few years, they still produced Old Grandad. They basically sourced it from different distilleries, but they kept the brand out in the market. And in 1940, National Distillers purchased the K. Taylor Distilling Company in Frankfurt, and they renamed it the Old Grandad Distillery. And that's the distillery that stayed there for years, continued producing Old Grandad. They've had 114 for quite a while, bottled and bond in 86. They had for quite a while. Once the 80s hit, they introduced the 80 proof. In 1987, National Distillers sold their brand, sold their distilleries. Most everything went to Beam Suntory, or Beam at that time, Beam Suntory now. I think there's a couple of assets that went elsewhere, but for our purposes tonight, the Old Grandad Distillery and the brand went to Beam. They eventually, we know now in 2013, they eventually discontinued the 86 proof. They kept the 80, the 100 proof bottled and bond, and the 114 proof.
Wes, how far back does that 114 go? Because that probably had to be like the Bookers of the day based on the proofs at that time.
I have seen the oldest 114 I've seen 70s for sure. I don't remember seeing any in the 60s. I'm not.
Are those crazy expensive, or is that something we could get and do an event with, like an old one? I'd love to try that.
We can acquire a National Distillers 114. So National Distillers. So the 114, the original 114 did not have Basil Hayden on the label. It had like this gold ribbon with this really dark labeling.
I've seen that. Yeah.
And then National Distillers, before they sometime in the 80s, before they sold to Beam, changed the label closer to what it looks like today, where it's got the Old Grandad, the 114. It has a picture, a silhouette of him in the background. So there are two different labelings and bottles for National Distillers Old Grandad. So yeah, it's on my list. They can be had, they can be found. But yeah, they're on the list. I personally have never had it. I've had the bottled and bond, and it's amazing. And I can't imagine the 114s anything less than that. That 114, outside of the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, when KBD, which was basically pre-Willet, were sourcing a lot of this old aged whiskey from Brown Foreman, Wild Turkey. None of it's substantiated, but it's all rumored. Heaven Hill for sure, probably some Barton, maybe some Buffalo Trace. That's when they created all these brands that had really well-aged old whiskey. They were putting out, 15 to 20 something year rare perfections. They had Noah's Mill 15 years. They had all these well-aged whiskeys, and a lot of them, like a lot of the original very old St. Nick came out of Willet KBD, and a lot of those are barrel proof. They're 118, 120 proof. But outside of those special bottlings, Wild Turkey 101 obviously is 101 proof. You had a lot of bottled bonds. I don't know that there's anything out there dusty wise that's much over 114 proof outside of some of those KBD bottlings.
And a lot of those, the KBD ones, went to Japan.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, most of those went to Japan.
They're shipping those overseas. So it makes it even tougher to find. Though there's probably an opportunity for someone to go over there and just do some dusty hunting over in Japan. And
absolutely,
they got to be still around somewhere.
I'm waiting for the day when I get to go back to Japan, and I doubt it to be anytime soon for work, because I'm gonna plan accordingly and try to snag as many items as I can find. It's still sitting around, quote unquote, on the shelf in different places. You just have to be willing to go out and search for it, but it's out there for sure.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yep. So that's the 114 is definitely on the list of things that we can get later. But
okay. Yeah.
So we know in 87, obviously anytime there's a buyout, there's always a transition. There's some late 80s bottles that have, you have to look at labels very carefully to determine where they're from. There's some that are what I call dual label, where they're distilled at Old Grandad, but they're bottled in Claremont and things of that nature. And some of those are probably still ND distilled, but bottled under Beam. So some of those are out there. But that's kind of the history of where they're at. They've been Beam since 87. One piece of interesting information, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I wanted to, it's my last bullet point. Old Grandad is the only brand being purchased from National Distillers. They did not change the mash bill once they acquired it. Yes. So Old Crow, for instance, they immediately started bottling their 3-year-old Jim Beam regular mash bill as Old Crow. Old Taylor, they initially made it a 6-year, but they changed the mash bill to I think they added some rye content to it, and then eventually they just took the age statement off. And I think today's product is 4 years, give or take, but not age stated. But this is Old Grandad is the only one they did not touch the mash bill, which means it still has that high rye content.
And Wes, does Beam, they still operate the Old Grandad Frankfurt distillery, right? So when you think about them, you think about the Boston plant where Booker was always, it's now the Booker No plant. And then you got Claremont, which is the one that you visit if you're going to go see Beam. But they do have the Old Grandad plant too, still.
Yep, they do. And so part of that Frankfurt connection with the Old Grandad plant, the Old Taylor plant, which is now Cass on Key, the Old Crow plant, which is basically defunct, but it's in semi-operation under Glenn's Creek Distilling, I think is who it is.
Yeah.
All of those have quite a intertwined history, and they were all owned by National Distillers at the same time. They traded master distillers from each location. There's Old Crow, there's Dusty Old Crow that was actually distilled at Old Taylor and then moved over and stored, and vice versa. So it's interesting that on those bottles, those old Dusties of predominantly Old Crow and Old Taylor, but even Old Grandad, you have to pay real close attention to the DSP number on the bottle, distilled here, and to really pinpoint where they come from. But ultimately, they're all ND juice, all basically within a 20-mile radius of each other, give or take.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the Old Grandad history as far as as far as I know it, and as far as I could dig up. Anybody have any questions, comments? No? I blew everyone's mind. Thank you.
All right.
Does anybody have any of the sample one left? And have you gone back into the glass? The reason I ask, and I always do this after it's set out for just a bit and I've been talking, I go back into it. Now I get really heavy burnt sugar, creme brulee kind of deal going on. Just
Yeah.
all right. Let's go to number 2.
Number 2. Okay.
Anybody has any questions, comments, concerns? Anything along the way, jump on in.
Any rhyme or reason on the facial expression of Mr. Hayden on those bottles? 86 was always him smiling. The 80 was him flat-faced or angry or whatever.
I'm guessing that
Marketing
there's
twist on that.
not that I was able to find. I have this weird feeling it's one of those company only jokes where they're like, hey, you know what? Like this year he's going to be happy, and next year, you know, this is going to be him. He's going to be pissed off in the 80s or whatever. I feel like it's one of those and it's almost like you can't do it anymore, but back in the day you could play those games where, you know, like Steve and I, if we worked for the same company at the staff meeting, we could play this game of, hey, try to work in this word into the meeting today. It was always be something not dirty, but kind of weird and obscure that if you put it in correctly, nobody would know. But if you put it in incorrectly, everybody would look at you like you're an idiot. I have a feeling it's one of those, like the marketing group had this little game they played where like every decade or every few years, we're going to change his expression and see if anybody picks up on it or something. I don't know.
I think that the pissed off one's the closer one. I mean, come on, the guy lived in the 1700s. I mean, life was not easy. He's not all smiling. It doesn't look like a happy grandpa, you know, some of those.
No, he does not.
He's got glasses.
Clearing land and planting farms himself. Yeah, that's not easy labor.
No.
He's probably 35 and, you know, in that portrait.
Right.
He aged a lot faster then.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had walked to school both ways uphill in the snow. He was pissed off, barefooted. One thing I will notice is this one appears to be a little bit darker in the glass.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it still has a pretty similar viscosity, maybe a little bit thinner, but still really nice.
I'd say it's a little thinner. I'm spotty. It could be the glassware that I got. But I also notice if you look in the glass, if you got a background behind it, there's a nice clear ring around where the liquid meets the glass. That's where I kind of I'm guessing this one's going to be the dusty, because I tend to find that with the dusties. The way it sits in the glass, it doesn't coat all the way through. The color is always it lightens up towards the top of where the liquid meets the glass. I don't know if that's that ethyl carfambate or whatever it was. That EC they started taking out of the process. I could be wrong. But that's
Freddie Noah was talking about that on our Dusty Booker's event we did, where he was joined.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The nose to me on this one is really heavy stone fruit, like cherry, plum. I don't know if plum's a stone fruit, but it is now.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's non-citrus fruit. How about that?
Yeah, I mean,
that one finishes a lot stronger than the last one. At least to me.
The spice starts more front to mid palate as opposed to back, and it just kind of washes down. And to me, it's I don't get that mint that I usually get from a rye. This is more what I would call like baking spice, kind of earthy, spicy. Yeah, it's good.
Kind of almost reminds me like a mulled wine at Christmas, that kind of spice profile, a little bit more of that. And this would be great for after Thanksgiving, because you need another excuse to fall asleep watching football.
yeah.
Bob, what about you, sir? You're on mute. There we go.
Nose is much more pronounced on number 2.
Mhm.
And the finish is definitely heavier. It just seems to be stouter all the way around.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Do we want to start some of the voting, Steve?
Yeah, let's have Nikki and Betsy weigh in on this one. What are your guys' thoughts on this one?
It's good. Yeah, I definitely get the more of the baking spice versus the mint that you were talking about, Wes. It's real. It all marries. The analogy about the mulled wine I thought was really good because it feels like it's kind of like married together in a really nice way. And it has like a really nice long finish. Definitely agree about the stone fruit on the nose. Nikki, I know you were commenting on that as well. Your turn.
Yeah, I'm also getting something on the nose I can't quite put my finger on. I'm not sure what it is.
Juicy fruit gum. We can't go into that without saying.
When in doubt, we say that.
Yes, when in doubt, it's juicy fruit. That's our marzipan.
That's our default. Yes.
Yes.
That's our default, juicy fruit.
Yeah, juicy fruit.
I'm gonna remember that. Yeah, yeah. No,
Hubba bubba bubble gum.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely more. The spice is definitely much more forward on the palate. Maybe lingers a little bit more too.
Yep, looks like Robinson.
Connecting. What year is the second one from, Wes? We know the one, the real dusty one's from 1970. What's the other year?
Oh, the more recent.
The other 86 proof. Yeah,
That was
Yeah,
2013.
2013.
2013. Okay.
Yep. 2013 it is. That was the last year that Beam released the 86 proof.
All right. Robin, you with us?
Yes, I am. I am traveling, so you're going to see a static picture tonight, but I am here.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sitting in the airport, but I'm drinking at you OGD.
Okay, good.
Spectacular.
You'll have to go back and watch the history because the history is great on this one. And so we've kind of gone through that.
I missed everything. I
You
thought
missed it. Yeah.
My flyer has 6, Steve.
Really? No.
Yeah, it's 6 p.m. Pacific time. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
I'll confirm next time.
Yeah. So our normal start time, other than we do a Sunday event, and we do a Saturday event too, so unless it's Saturday or Sunday, our normal start time is 8 Eastern, so 7, 6, 5 your time.
It'll be 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, you didn't put it on here. That was done by Eventbrite, so that's their mistake.
Oh, darn them Eventbrite folks.
I
They messed
know.
us up. So it's recorded though, and I'll send out a link to it, so you will be able to catch that after the fact. Right now, we're kind of tasting both side by side. We've gone through individually, kind of talked about them, and now we're in our mind we're formulating what we think about this. Which one's the dusty? Now the twist here, Robin, you knew going into this one is from 1970. The thing Wes did, because it was an 86 proof from 1970, he found the last year that they did 86 proof with Old Grandad. That was 2013. They've discontinued the 86. So so you're tasting the 1970 and a 2013. So we're tasting them ourselves here independently and see if we can figure out which one is the true dusty, the one from 1970. So that's what we're working on right now. That catches you up.
So Robin, did you say?
Let's just start from the beginning. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, I can do it.
No, I'll go back. You don't have to
Okay.
do that, but I'll go back and look at it for sure. I do that all the time.
So Robin, have you had a chance to sample both or either?
I have.
So we would be interested in your feedback. Everyone's kind of given their opinion of taste and smell, palate, nose, as well as anything else, viscosity, finish, whatever. We'd be interested to hear yours.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure. I don't remember which one it was. Let's see. I think it was number 2. Is that the way they were labeled, Steve?
Yes.
Yeah, 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Okay, good. So I think it was number 2. I don't know which year that was, but I thought it to be, it was so mellow and it had like a caramel. It just it just glide down your throat. I mean, I
Mhm.
could sit there and sip that all day. So I really, really did like that one. Probably more than number one. I felt like it had a little kick to it.
Mhm.
So a little bit of spice, but still, more on the cinnamon side. And it was still very mellow, but just a little more of a kick.
Yeah, I predict, Steve, that we may have one of our closest votings on this one that we've had in some of the.
This
other-
is a tough one. They're
Yeah.
both excellent, by the way, both excellent.
I think so too.
I would sit there and enjoy either of these if someone was pouring that. I would like both of them immensely.
I agree.
All right. So what we typically do, and I think there's a few people that have been on to the Dusty events before. There's a couple new people. We appreciate you as well. So what we typically do once we've sampled and I've gone through the history, we like to do two things. We like to go around and vote, have everyone vote A, which one they liked best, and B, which one they think is the Dusty, and then by default, which one they think is the newer version.
Okay.
And then Steve will keep score, and then at the end, whoever gets the most answers right wins one of Steve's Tommy Bahama shirts.
Don't offer those up. I can't lose my Tommy Bahama shirts.
All right. All right. I always just start at the top of my screen. It's just random order. So we're going to go with the very distinguished young gentleman named Tim Sawat.
I really enjoy both of these. I think the number one I found actually to be smoother. Number two I found to be more complex. I'm going with the Dusty in the 1970 being OGD 2, and the more recent one being OGD 1 for 2013.
Okay. All right. Which one did you like better, Tim, taste wise?
I got to go with 2. I'm going with 2.
2. Okay. It's all in on 2. Okay.
All right. Bob, your turn to vote, sir.
When I initially nosed them, I immediately thought that 1 was the newer version and 2 was the older version. And I'm happy to say that the tasting and their comments have confirmed that in my mind. I think OGD 2 is the Dusty,
Okay.
and OGD 2 is also my favorite.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I got good taste.
You're saying the same thing, Robin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. Yeah.
2 and 2.
2 and 2. Okay.
All right. Betsy, you're up next. Which one do you like best, and which one do you think is the Dusty?
So sorry, 1 second.
Go ahead.
I actually liked number 1 better, but I think 2 is the Dusty.
Okay.
I'm gonna go, Nikki, your turn.
All right.
I agree. I liked number 1 a little bit better, and I also think 2 is the Dusty.
All right, Mike, it's up to you, sir.
Oh, once again on a Dusty, I'm going double deuce. So
Double deuce. Okay.
Steve?
Boy, this is tough. This is tough. I keep going back.
Just requires more sampling, right?
Mm-hmm. I think I like number 2 better, but I think number 1 is the Dusty.
Wow. It's a departure from most everyone else.
Yes, yes. And the legend.
Here we go.
Number 1 is his favorite. And number 1, he believes is the Dusty. He voted 1 and 1.
Okay. So
Right.
what's the final tally?
Okay, the final tally, the favorite of the night was number 2. It won by a score of 5-3 over number 1. The Dusty was voted 6-2 as being number 2. So only 2 picked
Okay,
number
so
1.
the
being
predominant favorite is number 2, and the predominant guess on the Dusty is number 2.
Correct.
Okay, so I will report that For the first time in any of these events,
Wow.
I have managed to stump the population. Number one is the Dusty.
Hey,
Yes, Steve was right.
I got it.
And
You had to
again,
go opposite, Steve.
the
Everybody's
legend-
voting the
the-
same way. You got to zag. Everybody's zigging.
Yeah, the legend is still undefeated, by the
The
way.
legend still can't be beat, though. Yeah.
That guy.
He's never missed one. Seriously, in all these that we've done, he's never missed one.
You know what, Steve? He should get in on that Bardstown Bourbon Company promotion about
He
the
should.
world's best palate. Just let him win it right now.
Yeah. Maybe.
Whatever happened to Tim Swy, the science guy? I thought you nailed it, Tim.
I thought I did too. I'm looking at that. It's the only one that looked different. And I went
Bob was
one
blaming
being
you.
thinner.
It's your
When the
fault,
big
Tim.
It is. I swayed
No one
everybody with
listened
my
to you.
Ethel fan bait.
So here's the great thing about, I actually love if we go back to the story and then we take the results of the voting. I actually love the results of the voting. It's not because anybody was stumped or anything. That the intent wasn't that. But what I like about it is, if you remember, the very last piece of information that I put in there was that the old Granddad brand was the only one of the olds or any of the brands that Jim Beam purchased in '87 that they did not screw around with and do anything with. They left the mash bill the same. It's in the same distillery. More than likely, it's one of those scenarios where if it's not broke, why fix it? Let's just keep on going. Let's pump this stuff out and go. And I think that both of these samples came from the same distillery. We learned that distillery was erected in 1940, I believe it was. Obviously, things change like wood and so forth, but you can tell these were pretty close. And it's not surprising to me that the 2013 was the favorite over the Dusty. I think both are phenomenal, and I wouldn't pass either one up. And I think if we were to do this again, blind again, I'm not so sure the decision wouldn't be flip-flopped. I think, a lot of tasting is obviously what you've had to eat that day and what your mood is and the whole 9 yards, and you get into listening to the history and so forth. And that's why I love doing these blind. But yeah, I love the outcome. I think it helps tell part of the story.
Yeah. No, very, very cool stuff, Wes. So that was really a good one. And yeah, both very enjoyable. I like the twist that you did on us too. You didn't bring in the 2021 Old Granddad. You brought in that 2013, which is very cool. Added yet another element of awesomeness to this particular event. So,
And the best outcome, I think, is that you can go to a liquor store today and for a bargain price still buy a very fine bottle of bourbon.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a bargain price whiskey and it's fabulous.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, today, any bourbon and rye whiskey for that matter, but any American whiskey, bourbon and rye is what I stick to, that you can get for under $30 is considered a bargain.
Yeah.
Like there are still things you can get for $20 or under, but anything under $30 is considered a bargain. And I still like the fact that you can get a 6-year wheated bourbon in Maker's Mark for that price point. You can get 100 proof bottled and Bono Granddad for that price point. You can get, there's a litany. You can get different versions of Old Forester. You can get Old Forester 100 proof. You can get 86 proof. There's all Wild Turkey 101, Wild Turkey Rye 101. You can get all these things for under $30. And they have, a lot of these have held up in these, I'm a huge Dusty guy, but I'm a huge Dusty guy more on the side of the history. Now, there are some Dusty pours that if you're fortunate enough to be able to have a drink, they are kind of game changing in their quality. But for the most part, for me, it's the getting into the history and learning and figuring out who did what to whom and this long history a lot of these brands and distilleries have. But it's nice to know that at least in our events, we've had quite a few of the more modern version hold up their own, and in some cases beat the Dusty. Early Times was probably the first big, what I would call upset, because I like the Early Times Dusties, but that now it's soon to be made at Buffalo Trace. But what we reviewed was the Early Times Bottled and Bond that came back out for the first time, I think starting in 17 or 18, and it blew that Dusty out of the water. I mean, it wasn't even close. So yeah, I like the fact, we have so much bourbon to choose from, and people complain we can't get this or we can't find that, and it's frustrating. I get it, but it's still good to know there's some obtainable, really good pours. And for all the naysayers out there that just scoff at some of the bargain bourbons, this event here is proof positive that something distilled and bottled in what I would call the post-glut era, 2000s and beyond, can go toe-to-toe with a 70s Dusty that is considered one of the best out there.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Excellent work, Wes. What are you trying to track down now? What you getting close?
I know there's some people on the call that have been on most, if not all, of the events, so they've heard me talk the last couple of events. I'm still chasing down this Dusty Makers. I'm going to get it. That one, I'm super excited about that one, because if there's any brand and any distillery and any company that has preached on the highest mountain consistency, and they just do all these crazy things to guarantee consistency and quality and prevent variation, it's Maker's Mark. So we're going to put them to the test, and we're going to do a Maker's Dusty. If I can find one from the late 60s, early 70s, I'm going to do that. If not, I know I can get some from the early 80s. We're going to put it toe-to-toe to one right off the shelf today. We're going to do it blind like we always do, and we're going to put their consistency to test and see what happens. So I'm still actively chasing that one down. The other one that I'm really concentrated on right now is I'm trying to find, it's probably going to be an old Fitzgerald, but I'm trying to find a 60s, 70s, or 80s Stitzel-Weller decanter.
Okay.
It's always one that everybody's, if they're not excited about, they should be excited about, because it can be game changing. So, and then I'm always on the lookout for just oddball, if nothing else, oddball labels that no one's ever heard of, so that I can go and do the history behind the label and where it came from, and who knows, we may be able to tell a story that no one else has heard before. There's tons of old labels that have ties into these old distilleries and things of that nature. So we'll have another one posted pretty soon. I just want to find the right one.
All right. That sounds good. Yeah. Makers is such an interesting one, because, as they've expanded, they've always done the exact same thing. They have to have the exact same still from the exact same manufacturer, the exact same size. Everything has to be. And matter of fact, as they project their company growing, because they pull all their water from their lake there, they're like, at some point they're going to outgrow that lake. So they bought the farm next to them that has a lake on it. So now they literally want things to be that consistent, where they're literally buying out property with lakes. So as they outgrow the lake that they've got another one pulling from basically the same water table. So cool stuff. So cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this one up. I'll stick around for a little bit if you guys have any questions, anything like that. But we will say goodbye, stop the recording, and say goodbye to our folks that are watching this and tasting their whiskey right now. So thanks everyone. Take care. Thank you, Wes. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, guys.
A little applause for Wes as we close out here. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, good job, Wes.